The relentless summer sun beat down as I reluctantly packed my bags for a week-long family vacation at a seaside cottage. My parents' invitation had been unexpected, and I found myself torn between the need to escape my monotonous work routine and the apprehension of spending extended time with my family. The deciding factor, however, was knowing that my sister Myra had already agreed to come. It had been too long since we last saw each other, and the chance to reconnect outweighed my doubts. As I zipped up my suitcase, I reflected on the distance that had grown between us since Myra left for university. Our once closed relationship had dwindled to occasional texts and sparse social media interactions. I thought about calling her now and then, but the fact that I'd have to ask our mom for her current number always made me put it off. The drive to the cottage was long and uneventful. Most of the time I was lost in thought, wondering how much Myra might have changed in our time apart. As we finally arrived at the charming beachside property, a mix of excitement and nerves settled in my stomach. The first day at the cottage passed without Myra's arrival. I tried to distract myself by exploring the beach, feeling the warm sand under my feet and the salty breeze on my skin. As I lay on the sand with my eyes closed, the sun's warmth seeping into me, I found myself enjoying the change of scenery. It was a welcome contrast to the sterile, air-conditioned office life. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was startled awake by a familiar voice. Myra had arrived, announcing her presence with a colorful string of complaints as she tripped over a rock. I kept my eyes closed, grinning as I heard her approaching. Some things never change. She plopped down beside me, grumbling about the lone rock on an otherwise perfect beach, falling easily back into our playful banter. We teased each other about her clumsy feet and lack of foresight in going barefoot. It felt good, familiar, like slipping into a favorite old sweater. When I finally opened my eyes and saw Myra, I was surprised by how much she had changed. The awkward teenager I remembered had grown into a beautiful young woman. Her features had matured and her confidence radiated. I stared a little longer than I should have before catching myself. We spent the next hour catching up on each other's lives. Myra asked about Emma, my ex, not knowing we had broken up. I winced internally, realizing I hadn't told our parents about the split, wanting to avoid Mom's attempts to fix my love life. As I explained the situation to Myra, I was grateful for her understanding and support. Talking about relationships led to some reflection. I'd never had trouble attracting women, but long-term relationships had always been difficult for me. It dawned on me that Myra was one of the few people around whom I could just be myself, without the pressure of being agreeable all the time. Our conversation was cut short when Myra announced she was going for a swim. She pulled off her shirt, revealing a bold blue bikini underneath, and I was caught off guard. My eyes lingered a little too long, so I quickly made a sarcastic comment about her swimwear to cover my discomfort. Myra dismissed it with a quick retort, but there was something in her eyes that made me wonder if she had chosen the bikini for a reason. I pushed the thought away, scolding myself for even considering such an idea. I followed her into the water, partly to cool off, and partly because I didn't want our time together to end just yet. The cool ocean water felt refreshing against my sun-warmed skin, momentarily washing away the unsettling thoughts I'd been having. Myra swam further out, then turned back toward me, her hair slicked back, her skin glistening in the sunlight. As she commented on how great the water felt, I struggled to maintain eye contact. I felt my gaze being pulled toward the curves of her body beneath the surface, feeling a sudden rush of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. Abruptly, I turned and made my way back to shore. Myra called after me, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. I paused, trying to collect my thoughts, desperate to explain my retreat without revealing the inappropriate feelings that had surfaced. When Myra caught up to me, her closeness only made things worse. She mistook my discomfort for anger, and I found myself assuring her she hadn't done anything wrong. Then Myra made a confession that rocked me. In a soft voice, she admitted she had chosen that bikini to get a reaction from me. She spoke about noticing my physique and feeling conflicted about her own attraction to me. Her words were both a relief and a source of fear, as I realized the confusing feelings I had weren't one-sided. The tension between us was undeniable as we stood there on the beach, the waves lapping at our feet, the sun blazing down on our shoulders. I was torn between the obvious taboo of our attraction and the pull I felt toward her. In a moment of levity, I joked that we were both weirdos breaking the tension with laughter. It led to a playful scuffle, with Myra ending up sitting on my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. The physical contact was impossible to ignore. Our teasing had taken on a new layer, one I wasn't prepared for. As we walked back to the cottage, an unspoken understanding hung in the air between us. We both knew something had shifted, but neither of us was ready to face what that meant. The rest of the day blurred with family activities and stolen glances. Our parents blissfully unaware of the tension between us. We played along, engaging in conversation and joining in games, all the while hyper-aware of each other's presence. As night fell and we retired to our separate rooms, I knew this vacation was going to be far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. Unable to sleep, my mind raced with thoughts of Myra, replaying our interactions on the beach and imagining scenarios that both excited and unnerved me. I tossed and turned, the warm summer night doing little to cool the heat rising within me. After hours of restless attempts at sleep, I made a decision that would change the course of our relationship forever. Heart pounding, I quietly made my way to Myra's room, hesitating outside her door as I wrestled with my conscience. Standing there, hand hovering near the door, I was keenly aware of the boundary I was about to cross. The soft sound of her breathing echoed in the stillness of the hallway. After a brief hesitation, I gently turned the doorknob, finding it unlocked. "Myra," I whispered as I nudged the door open slightly. "Are you awake?" No response. The moonlight streamed through her window, casting a soft glow over her sleeping form, her dark hair fanned across the pillow. I knew I should turn back, that watching her like this was an invasion of her privacy. But I couldn't pull myself away. Minutes passed as I stood, torn between the desire to be near her and the voice of reason urging me to leave. In the end, desire went out. I carefully lowered myself onto the bed beside her, telling myself that just lying there wouldn't cross any lines. Suddenly her voice pierced the silence. "Have you been awake this whole time?" My heart nearly stopped. "Damn it, Myra, you scared me." She turned toward me, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I wanted to see what you'd do if you thought I was asleep." "Obviously nothing," I defended, insisting I wouldn't have crossed any lines while she was sleeping. But her next question caught me off guard. "How about now that you know I'm awake?" The weight of her words hung between us, thick with implication. I struggled to form a response, my mind racing through the possibilities her question presented. "I don't know." I finally admitted. Her hand found mine in the darkness, sending a shiver down my spine. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "Do you feel what you're doing to me?" I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The tension between us had reached a breaking point. And in that moment, all the reasons why we shouldn't do this faded into the background. Our lips met in a kiss both tender and charged, with years of unspoken feelings. It was a moment of release, a culmination of emotions that had been building for longer than I cared to admit. What followed was a night of discovery, as we explored each other with curious hands and eager lips. The taboo nature of what we were doing seemed only to intensify the passion. In the back of my mind, I knew we'd have to face the consequences of this night, but in that moment, nothing else mattered but Myra. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, we lay tangled in each other's arms, our breathing slowly returning to normal. Myra's had rested on my chest, her hair tickling my skin. The reality of what we had done started to sink in, bringing a wave of conflicting emotions. "Myra," I began, my voice hoarse. "We need to talk about this." She propped herself up on one elbow, meeting my eyes. "I know," she said softly, "but can we just stay like this a little longer?" I nodded, pulling her closer. We lay there in silence, both of us lost in thought about what the future held. When we finally spoke, it was with raw honesty. We talked about the attraction that had been simmering for years, the confusion and shame we felt, and the fear of what this would mean for us and our family. "I'm on birth control," Myra admitted, addressing one immediate concern. "I've been taking it for a while." Her practical statement made me smile despite the seriousness of the situation. "Always prepared, huh?" She playfully swatted my arm, but her expression quickly grew serious again. "What are we gonna do?" It was a question without an easy answer. We both knew that what had happened between us wasn't just wrong in the eyes of society. It was illegal. Yet the depth of our feelings couldn't be denied. I don't know, I admit it. But I do know that I don't want to lose you. Not again. Tears welled in Myra's eyes. I don't want to lose you either. But how could we ever make this work? We spent the next few hours discussing our options, weighing the risks of pursuing a relationship against the impossibility of going back to just being siblings. Neither choice was without its challenges. As we heard our parents moving around downstairs, we knew our time alone was coming to an end. Myra quickly dressed and headed for the shower while I slipped back to my room, my mind still racing. The rest of the vacation passed in a blur of stolen glances and secret smiles. To our parents, it seemed like we had simply reconnected as siblings. But beneath the surface, a current of desire and tension ran between us. On our last night at the cottage after our parents had gone to bed, Myra and I found ourselves alone on the beach. The moon cast a silvery path across the waves, and the air was thick with unspoken words. "I don't want this week to end," Myra said softly, her hand finding mine in the sand. "Me neither," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "But we can't hide here forever." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed innocent to an outsider, but to us it held so much more. "What happens when we go back to real life?" she asked, voicing the question we had both been avoiding. "We stay in touch," I said firmly. "No more letting months go by without talking. We figure this out together day by day." Myra nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Promise, promise," I said, sealing it with a quick kiss. As we sat there on the beach, the future uncertain, but full of possibility, I realized that no matter what happened next, this week had changed us both in ways we could never have predicted. The bond between us, always strong, had now been reforged in a way that would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. The drive home the next day was bittersweet. We exchanged phone numbers directly, no longer needing to go through our mom as an intermediary. In the weeks that followed, we navigated the complexities of our new relationship. There were moments of doubt, times when the guilt and fear seemed overwhelming. But there were also moments of pure joy, of a connection so deep it left us breathless. We had learned to balance the love we had for each other as siblings with the new feelings that had developed. It wasn't always easy, and we knew that if our secret ever came to light, we could lose everything. But as I lay beside Myra one night, nearly a year after that fateful vacation, I knew that I wouldn't change a thing. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was my partner, my confidant, my best friend, and that was all that mattered. Story 2, I gradually awoke from a deep sleep, feeling both discomfort and a peculiar sense of satisfaction. My throat was parched, my head throbbed, and my stomach turned. But there was a warmth spreading through my body and a sticky dampness between my legs that seemed to balance out the unpleasantness. I struggled to open my eyes, squinting against what seemed like bright sunlight, though I would later realize that the day was actually overcast. My condition made the light feel blinding. Despite the lingering exhaustion, the faint bite marks on my skin suggested the night hadn't been wasted. As I lay there with my eyes closed, a smile crept onto my face, for reasons I couldn't quite understand. There was no rational explanation, given how distant Tom and I had been in recent months. Our early encounters had been vastly different from the current state of our relationship. We first met at work, where I was analyzing statistics and Tom was involved in security. The physical attraction was immediate and undeniable. I had felt an almost overwhelming desire for him that nearly caused me to break my own rule against getting intimate on a first date. Tall and strong, with captivating blue eyes and handsome features, Tom had a way of making himself irresistible. I was taken aback when he refused my advances. When I shared the experience with my friend Evelyn, she advised that if he was the right person, he would be willing to wait. I chose to heed her advice, despite Evelyn's usual allure and confidence, which seemed to draw people to her effortlessly. Her wariness of Tom had always been evident, although I hadn't perceived any signs of her being attracted to him. Yet I did notice a certain tension when I spoke about him, and I made a mental note to ask her about it another time. Later, I couldn't help but laugh to myself as I lay there, recalling the moment Tom had lifted me effortlessly when we were alone, standing about 4 or 5 inches taller than me. He wrapped me in his arms, pulling me close, his lips hungrily searching for mine. I clung to him, my fingers tangled in his hair as our kiss deepened, an electric connection surging between us. I let go of my purse and kicked off my shoes from our walk along the beach, surrendering to the heat of the moment. His embrace tightened, one hand gripping my waist as he held me closer. When I shifted, it stirred Tom awake and he chuckled. "What are you up to, Marie?" he asked. "I'm cold," I admitted with a playful pout, kissing him between his shoulder blades while my hands roamed over his back. I felt a rough patch beneath my fingertips and looked down. "What's this?" I asked, noticing a small jagged red mark on his lower back, about the size of a dime. "That's a birthmark," Tom explained, rolling over to hug me again. "Every man in my family has it. If we ever have a son, you better watch out. If he doesn't have a mark like that, I'll know you've been seeing the milk." "Man," he joked. I laughed. "Don't worry," I assured him. "I'm loyal always." A few months later, Tom and I were married in a quiet civil ceremony. The only real disappointment was Evelyn's reluctance to be my witness. Though she eventually agreed, I was left wondering why she seemed so resistant to the idea of me marrying Tom. His witness was our colleague Jay, Tom's closest friend, who shared his love for poker and fishing. Tall and broad-shouldered with sharp features and dark, polished ebony skin, Jay was quite the catch. I had even tried nudging Evelyn in his direction when Tom and I first got serious, but she had shown little interest in him as well. It seemed there was more to Evelyn's reservations than she let on, but I didn't press her to explain. Time went on, and at first things seemed to be going smoothly. However, after a couple of years, we fell into a routine that many couples find themselves in, balancing work, social obligations, and the seemingly endless demands of our careers. Our intimacy, which had once been a constant in our relationship, gradually dwindled, first to weekly encounters, then to every other week, and eventually it became rare. I knew that both Tom and I shared responsibility for the decline in our romantic life. It wasn't just about the bedroom. The simple acts of affection, like hugs, kisses, and tender words, also faded, leaving a void. I did my best to stay fit, hitting the gym regularly and keeping an eye on my weight. But late work nights often meant dinner consisted of beer and pizza. Despite my efforts, I couldn't stop the few extra pounds from creeping on since our wedding. The issue of starting a family only added to the strain. Tom suggested we delay having children until we felt more financially secure, and I agreed, secretly savoring the idea of being able to fully focus on motherhood when the lay. One Friday, I made a spontaneous decision to rekindle the spark between us. I left work early, prepared a roast dinner, and splurged on a black lace nightgown after saving my allowance for weeks. I set the table, lit some candles, and poured wine, perfectly timing it so that Tom would arrive just as everything was ready. However, I had completely overlooked the fact that it was the third Friday of the month, Tom's poker night with David, which had been a tradition long before we married. Though he appreciated the effort and enjoyed the meal, he reminded me about his poker nights, which I should have known about. 2 weeks later, Tom surprised me with tickets for a weekend cruise, but the timing clashed with a tax seminar I was obligated to attend. His anger was palpable, as he claimed I hadn't mentioned the seminar at all, and no matter how much I apologized, he remained convinced that he had put in all the effort only for me to ruin it. The strain between us became even more pronounced after that. It was quite unexpected when David announced his upcoming party and insisted that we both attend, determined not to let anything go wrong this time. I made up my mind to make it a night to remember. Though I found it disheartening to have to go to such lengths to seduce my own husband, I knew that if I had simply remembered to tell him about the seminar, none of this would have been necessary. I dressed in a black dress that ended a few inches above my knees and paired it with 3-inch heels. Beneath it all, I wore nothing but a red lace slip. Tom looked incredibly handsome that evening, just as I remembered him from before we got married. His attention toward me, helping me in and out of the car, and engaging with me felt like a glimmer of hope. We spent the evening eating and then went dancing. I was in bliss, craving the feel of Tom's body pressed against mine. I didn't care about drawing attention as I moved closer to him on the dance floor, hoping the night would naturally progress to a more intimate conclusion. The details from the rest of the night, however, became a blur. I recalled dancing with Tom close to midnight, but the rest was vague, fragmented. I couldn't even remember how we had left the hotel and gotten back home. Despite the haziness, I felt certain we'd had a good time, and hoped this was the end. I felt a faint sense of satisfaction. I opened my eyes and saw my clothes draped over the edge of the bed. Perhaps the red lace had done its job after all. Waking up on clothing beside a warm body felt exhilarating, and I thought about picking up where we'd left off. It was frustrating to have had the first good night in months and barely remember it. Determined, I rolled over to cuddle up to John, only to freeze in shock as I realized something was terribly wrong. My heart pounded as I tightly shut my eyes, hoping that when I opened them again, it would all turn out to be a bad dream. But when I looked, the reality hit me hard. It wasn't Tom lying next to me. The person I was wrapped around was unmistakably male, unclothed and had dark skin. I fought to stifle a scream as I propped myself up on my elbow, trying to make sense of the situation. It was David. I glanced around the unfamiliar room in a panic. I had never been inside David's bedroom before, nor had I ever had a reason to be interested in it. But now here I was, definitely not in my own bed, and definitely not with my husband. My hazy mind scrambled to make sense of the situation. If this was indeed David lying next to me, then I had to be in his bedroom. What on earth had happened to bring me here? I already knew the answer to what I was doing here, but I was clueless about how it came to be or why. Get it together, Marie, I told myself as I slid out from under the sheets. I quickly gathered my clothes, slipping on my dress, and felt a wave of relief when I spotted my purse resting on the dresser near the door. I grabbed it hastily, stuffing the torn lace, underwear inside, scooped up my shoes, and quietly crept out of the bedroom and down the stairs. Leaning against the hallway wall, I was overwhelmed with confusion. What now? I had no idea how I had ended up here, no plan for getting back home, and not a clue about what I would tell my husband. Panic surged through me. I had always prided myself on being faithful, committed to the relationships I was in, and yet here I was, married no less, and waking up in someone else's house. The thought was almost unbearable. I focused on the immediate need, getting out of this house before David woke up and going back home. I carefully opened the front door, turned to leave, and bolted down the driveway. My purse slipped from my grip, hitting the concrete with a dull thud, and my breath caught in my throat. There, leaning against the hood of his car, with his arms folded tightly across his chest, and an expression of anger I'd never seen before, was my husband. "Get in the car," he said through clenched teeth. I stood frozen, unable to speak or move. We drove home in complete silence, with me curled up in the passenger seat, staring out the window, my mind racing for something, anything to say. When we finally pulled into the garage, my husband broke the silence. "Get out," he ordered coldly, his voice cracking with suppressed emotion. I had never heard him speak to me like that before, but then again I had never given him a reason to. He pointed to the couch. "Sit down." I sank onto the sofa, curling up with my knees drawn to my chest, hugging them tightly. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. He looked devastated, furious, and hurt all at once. What had I done to him? He sat down in the armchair opposite me, his gaze locked on mine as the minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. "For God's sake, Tom, say something." I finally blurted out, the tension unbearable. "What the hell do you want me to say?" He growled, springing to his feet. He loomed over me, and I instinctively shrank back into the cushions. "Do you want me to tell you how I woke up this morning in David's guest room, only to find you weren't there? Or maybe you'd like to hear how I haven't seen you since we danced together last. Shall I tell you about my search for my loving, faithful wife, which ended in the one place I never thought I'd find her?" His voice was rising, almost shouting now. "Or would you prefer I describe what it felt like to watch you run out of that house, knowing exactly what had happened? Maybe you'd like to know how it feels to have your heart torn from your chest." Tears streamed down. My face's loud stops racked my body. I could hardly breathe. Tom sat down beside me on the couch. "Marie, for God's sake, say something," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Tell me why. Tell me what went so wrong that you went looking for love in the arms of my best friend." I tried to explain the rape. Thing is, I didn't have any explanation. I couldn't remember anything except wild copulation. I didn't even realize it was David, as if it were plausible. I remembered a couple we once knew. She would get drunk from time to time and act like the worst in the world the next morning. Not only could she not remember what had happened, but she also denied that anything unwanted had happened since she didn't remember it didn't happen. Well, I knew damn well it happened to me, but I didn't remember much of anything. And I certainly didn't remember getting into bed with David or doing anything with him at all. Will Giant accept this? Judging by the expression on his face when I stammered about my confusion and grief, he didn't believe me. Damn, I wouldn't believe it either. It sounded so lame, but it was true. Through my tears, I managed to tell him that I was very sorry, that I regret everything that I hurt him, that I betrayed his trust, that I regret the events that led us to this. Finally, he had his fill and turned away. I don't know what will happen next. I can't stay here. He headed toward the door. Someday I will return. The door slammed behind him, and I heard a car drive away. I just sat there watching the shadows lengthen and night fall. I turned on the lamp next to the sofa, afraid that the darkness would swallow me. Only the next day did I hear the door open. I was still sitting on the sofa. Most of all, I was afraid to go out. I ate only coffee and almost nothing else. Every time I tried to eat, I saw David's back in John's face and I felt sick. I slept fitfully on the sofa. When John returned, I wanted to rush to him and hug him, but I couldn't. I knew it would be a gesture I now would have to earn from him. I just sat there, curled up on the couch, and looked at his face, waiting for some sign. He leaned back in his chair, sighed, and ran his hand over his face. It looked like he didn't sleep much either. Finally, he looked at me. For a moment, his gaze slid away from mine, as if he couldn't stand to look at my face. How could I blame him? I'm not going to divorce you, Marie. I wanted to jump up from the couch and rush to him. God, I was ready to crawl to him for telling me that. I don't know if I have ever loved him more than at that moment, but all I could do was whisper, "Thank you. But everything will be different, I'll tell you that. You'll never be close to David. If he comes to the restaurant, you will get up and leave." He looked at me, raising an eyebrow questioningly. I nodded in agreement. "By the way, you won't go anywhere without telling me where you're going and with whom. You will not be alone with any guy in any situation unless I know about it and allow." He glanced around the house. "I wish we could manage on just my income, but it's not feasible anymore." Then meeting my gaze, he added, "Having you in the same building during the day brings me peace of mind, unless, of course, you're engaging in intimate activities with someone there." "No, Tom, never." I wanted to assure him that I would never be unfaithful to him at work, but the words failed to escape my lips. Until last night, I was certain that I'd never betray him. This is not all. He stood up and began to pace around the room, putting his hands behind his back. He looked at me and took a deep breath. Maybe I'll decide to have a mistress, maybe not. I started to protest and closed my mouth, but he must have noticed how I flinched. He raised his hand and pointed at me. "You have no right to protest against this decision." He stood in front of me. "Anytime you feel like you can't handle it, I'll give you another option. Tomorrow we're going to the law office." The divorce papers were filed, and there was a certified check for $10,000. "I've already signed the papers. Tomorrow you will do it too. If you find that you can't handle the consequences of your actions, just show up any day, sign and great. Collect your check. You will lose the rest of our common property." I shook my head in agreement. "You won't discuss this with anyone, even with Evelyn, or should I say especially with her? She never liked me, and she's going to spread it all over the company. Hell, all over town. Now no one knows about this except you and me, and of course David. Someday I'll talk to David and persuade him to keep quiet. Damn," he continued bitterly. "At least he owes me that. Oh, and I was planning on sleeping in the guest room, but it was a stupid idea." I looked at him, obviously, with some hope in my eyes, because he hastened to add, "It's you who will sleep there." He turned away from me again. "At least you didn't engage in intimacy with him in our bed." I muttered, burying my face in my hands, but still letting out a scream. "Needless to say, I won't engage in intimacy with you for at least 6 months after we consult the lawyer. I want you to make an appointment with the doctor and get everything checked out that you might have caught. David is a true swordsman. He stood up and began to climb the stairs. I'm going to take a shower. By the time I leave, you'll have moved everything you want to the other bedroom. Hearing the sound of water, I went upstairs to our bedroom. Automatically, I gathered my clothes and moved across the hall. I cleared my personal items from the dresser, removing my presents from the room. I thought for a moment about my things in the bathroom. I decided to leave them. I could buy new toothpaste and stuff. I wasn't going to break his decision by going there to get them. As it turned out, this was not necessary. Later, when he came over for dinner, he rudely informed me that he had packed up my stuff and moved it to another bathroom. The next day, we went to a lawyer's office and signed papers that could end our marriage. When we were done, the only thing keeping me from getting a divorce was my signature on the last page. Tom dropped me off at the doctor's office, and I went through a series of tests. Everything came back negative. But as I already knew, HIV can manifest itself even after 6 months. Life went on. This always happens. I cooked food, cleaned the house, went to work, and immediately returned home. When I had to go to the store, I would call Tom and tell him where I was going, and I would call him when I got home. I always used the phone in the house, not my cell phone, so that he knew for sure that I was really at home. I never saw David again. I heard rumors that Tom had gone to see him and that there was a lot of screaming outside David's office, indicating that they might have gotten into a fight. I didn't try to find out anything else. Evelyn knew something was wrong from the very first morning at work. She was upset that I refused to tell her. I knew it hurt. We always trusted each other. But I made a promise to Tom. I had broken one promise to him and was determined not to give him any reason to think that I would break another. She finally stopped asking, simply reassuring me that we would always be friends no matter what. I almost cried, but even weeks after that night, I was still too empty to cry. John treated me politely and correctly, but also kept me at arm's length. There were no words of love, no touches, no hints that reconciliation was getting closer. Every day he slipped. Once I made his favorite Sunday lunch, and he ate 2 portions of stew and was on his third when he finally pushed the plate away. He groaned with happiness. "Thank you, dear. That was great." I don't know if he hurt himself, but it touched my heart. John continued to commute to work. He continued to go out on Fridays. I knew he wasn't playing poker with David, but he'd apparently found another game. He returned home late at night with the smell of cigar smoke on his clothes and the occasional chip in his pocket. I had to call him one day when I realized I had forgotten a few things at the grocery store. That day, he gave me permission and briefly told me not to bother him anymore. I hoped this meant he was starting to trust me again, at least a little, and then the bottom fell out a week later. Just when I started to think that maybe we could get through this, Tom got home just in time. He often worked late, and I closed the computer and books at 4:30 sharp. I agreed on a few swing hours to avoid traffic jams and arrive home or work on time. He went to the buffet in the dining room and poured whiskey into a glass. He walked into the kitchen where I was cooking and added some water and 1 ice cube to his drink. He stood next to me and took a few sips before speaking. He was harsh. "Next week I'm going to Chicago for a conference. I'm going to leave tomorrow and make a vacation out of this. I've made arrangements with Mr. Jackson, the vice president, to take some time off. I'll be gone for 2 weeks, maybe more." He turned and looked out the window. Twice he began to speak and then fell silent. For the 3rd time he cleared his throat and spoke. "I won't go alone." These words seemed to echo throughout the house. Now it was my turn to look for the words that haunted me. I was pretty sure he didn't mean me, but I waited for him to say, "Understand, I'm taking Lynn Richardson with me." Lynn Richardson, I knew her. A blonde with sharp features, large chest, and long legs that she didn't even try to hide. Twice divorced, she was a good risk analyst, but because of the divorces, she would never get very far with Whitaker and company, still tightly controlled by the founder and his sons. They were great fans of family togetherness. She had a reputation for enjoying guys and for them enjoying her. I knew that John's family would not be a hindrance to her. I looked at John's face. There was determination in him, and perhaps even a hint of anxiety, embarrassment. He knew that I was well aware of what he was going to do during this trip. Yes, I swallowed hard and tried to keep my voice even. Do you want me to take you to the airport? No, I made other preparations. I see, I warned you that this could happen. I know, Tom. 2 weeks with her. Are you punishing me too much? I know you're still hurting, but this will hurt me even more. You go out with someone on purpose and leave me behind. This is not an accidental slip from drinking too much. This is a calculation. Maybe so, but it will happen. I want my self-respect back. If you don't like it, go to a lawyer. The rest of the evening passed in silence. Tom packed up while I cleaned up after dinner. As I started to walk up the stairs to go to bed, his voice came from behind me. Marie, maybe when this is all over, it will all be over. Maybe we can get back to where we started, from scratch. I looked at him and nodded. I hope so. The next morning I lay in bed and listened to Tom leave. Finally getting up, I got dressed and ate some toast and black coffee before heading to work. At 9 a.m. I called to make an appointment at the nearest clinic. This time, I only needed one test, and I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. I sat in the waiting room, unable to understand what the hell was going on. A nurse came and took me to the examination room. The test took only a few minutes. The doctor came in with a big smile on her face. Congratulations. I'm pregnant, aren't I? I answered quietly. Yes, of course. She seemed stunned. Is this wrong? No, not at all. I smiled at her, stretching my lips in an artificial grimace behind which there was neither laughter nor happiness. I left with a copy of the report and a card with the date of the next meeting. This was a meeting I never intended to go to. I got into the car and burst into tears. Was there even the slightest chance that the baby was John's? The time frame meant that David was the father that the child was conceived that night. I shook my head sadly. All the work, all the effort, everything goes down the drain. I had no hope of hiding this from Tom. Just when the possibility loomed that we could get our marriage back on track, this happened. This will destroy him forever. John had no intention of raising someone else's child, and I didn't know if I could either. For a moment I thought about abortion. No, I immediately rejected this thought. Despite my stupidity, the life growing inside me did nothing wrong. I wouldn't dare dictate to other women, but I couldn't terminate the pregnancy. I drove home slowly. I carefully packed everything I could into my car. Despite the agreement, I felt I deserved the car. I brought her into the marriage. I was going to take her back. The same went for the contents of the savings account that I opened when I first started working. I never closed it, and my pre-wedding savings can give me a nest. And the last thing to do, I went to see a lawyer. He wasn't there, but his board clerk found the folder and brought the papers for me to sign. He verified my signature and handed me the check. He told me that he would take the papers to the court and file them that same day. Since it was uncontested, the final decree would be issued after 30 days. I stuffed the certified check into the trunk along with the cashier's check that made up most of my savings account. I left my credit cards in a dresser at my old house. I still had one in my name that I never used but kept open because the financial advisor told us it was important to keep the loan in my name in case something happened to Tom. Well, something happened. I lost him. I stood by the car and for the last time looked around the city that I had called home for so long. I took a coin out of my jeans pocket and tossed it. Heads go north, tails go south. I climbed into my overloaded car, started the engine, and drove south along the highway. I had absolutely no idea where I was going. I just wanted to be somewhere else. I'd been driving on the interstate all day. I drove into a well-lit rest area, and they're not paying attention to the sign, overnight parking prohibited. I fell asleep. Perhaps I should have found a hotel room, but I didn't want to use my credit card until I could arrange for the bill to be forwarded to wherever I ended up. I didn't want to leave a mark. I felt like a fugitive, which in some ways I was a fugitive from my old life. Surprisingly, I slept soundly and did not wake up until the sun woke me up. I waited for the toilets to open, freshened up, and headed out again. I just followed the highway, heading south and east until I reached the sea, 3 states away from where I started my journey. Here in a small town, I would start my life again. First things first. Well, there were a lot of important things. I needed housing, I needed a job, I needed a doctor. Surprisingly, my luck seemed to change with the journey because all 3 of them fell in line, one after the other. An offhand comment from one of the county sheriff's deputies led me to a perfect little apartment, a converted carriage house of a large old house owned by a delightful, elderly couple. Not only did they make me feel welcome, but they also connected me with a local grocery store owner who needed an accountant. The store owner introduced me to a woman emergency room doctor who taught free night birth classes that were well within my budget. I worked, I ate, I did the exercises and took the vitamins recommended by the doctor. At first, I spent most of the evenings at home. I didn't bother with the TV, finding that I enjoyed listening to the radio, and since I was careful with money, this led me to the local library. The first night, I joined a literary discussion group. My Thursday evenings were busy from then on. As difficult as it was, I made an arrangement with the adoption agency that my doctor gently referred me to when I finally broached the subject with her. Maybe it was a weakness, but I knew I couldn't bear the stress of being a single mother to a biracial child. I was afraid that I would be offended, that I would blame my own failures and the collapse of my previous life on an innocent child. It is much better to find a home where this child can grow up in safety and love. I thought about Tom often, at least at first. I wonder how he copes. Was he sad? Was he upset by my leaving? Or did he regard my departure as good riddance? I didn't leave a note or a farewell message. I know I hurt him terribly, but he hurt me back. I, of course, did not expect that he would forget or forgive without much difficulty, but things went from bad to worse. It's probably for the best that it all ended this way for both of us, and yet I missed him. There were many nights when I closed my eyes and dreamed of him, but this happened less and less often. I deliberately did not take a single photograph of him from home. I didn't want to remind myself of what I'd lost once the divorce was finalized. I took the necessary steps to revert to my maiden name. I was no longer Mrs. Cooper. I was Miss Walcott again. Now I got comfortable and felt comfortable, if not happy. I made friends. I even went on a couple of dates. Of course, my increasingly bulging belly was no match for great slow dancing, let alone intimate propositions. So I continued to sleep alone and rock my boat. Then one morning, as I was crunching sales numbers and looking for an invoice that I couldn't find, my water broke, contractions started. Mr. Shaper called an ambulance, and his wife held my hand. I will not go into details that every woman who has ever given birth knows. Finally, I managed to make the last push. I heard crying as my baby took his first breath. I leaned back with relief. Miss Walcott, yes, I managed to answer, you have a wonderful boy. And with these words, the nurse placed a bundle wrapped in a blanket in my arms. Oh no, I shouldn't have seen him. I later learned that my premature birth took the adoption agency and the doctor by surprise. Instead of immediately taking the child away, they gave him to me. I tried to convince myself that I wouldn't look at him. I knew that if I spent even a little time, I wouldn't be able to let him go. But my eyes were fixed on him, and I looked. He was wonderful. His eyes were tightly closed. I unfolded the blanket to reveal 10 identical, perfect pinkies. He was the most wonderful creature I have ever seen in my life. And he was white. Somehow my hands moved on their own. Even when my brain refused to process the sight in front of my eyes, I carefully turned the baby onto his tummy and looked at his lower back. The tiny, jagged red mark was there. All I could think about was that son of a... I was still in a daze when I left the hospital with Mr. Clifford Walcott. I named him after my father. My parents died while I was in college, and Clifford's last name was mine, not the person who was responsible for him. Over the next few weeks, I was too busy to think about the amazing surprise. Stan and Muriel Ridgway, my wonderful landlords and friends, could hardly wait to babysit and allow me to return to work. They had no children of their own and immediately fell in love with Cliff. When I came home one afternoon and heard Muriel whispering to Cliff about how much Grandma loved him, my eyes filled with tears. Regardless of my current state of happiness or the prospect of a new life, I needed to unravel the events of that fateful night. I sat down and methodically attempted to piece together everything I knew and suspected. Firstly, it was undeniable that I had been intimate with John on that particular evening. It was the sole instance of intimacy in weeks, and it never recurred. Thus, it was logical to deduce that Cliff was conceived that night, and by my husband, Tom's assertion that he hadn't encountered me since our dance together was utter nonsense. though the night was tumultuous, I was certain I hadn't been with him before retiring to bed, meaning he must have engaged in intimacy with me later that night. No, I fumed inwardly. It wasn't lovemaking. Did I engage in intimacy with David? I couldn't say for certain. I couldn't shake off my doubts, primarily because of what I knew about Tom. If he had enough control to set this up, he would never allow anyone to take advantage of me. Besides, I knew David too. David didn't need to catch his women drunk and unconscious. He could make them line up 2 by 2. And why do I remember almost nothing about that night? Yes, I drank, perhaps more than usual, because I enjoyed myself and the new attention from my husband, but not so much as to lose consciousness. Obviously, it was too late to do a blood test to see if I had been killed, but I was leaning toward that conclusion. Okay, everything seemed to fit. I was set up by my ever-loving husband and took the blame for something I didn't do. But why? What could make John do this to me and then treat me like a leper when I've done nothing? Wrong seems simply impossible. Did I really know the man I married that badly? Now, I was almost sure that I knew what exactly happened. I just don't know the reason. Over the next few weeks, I considered various scenarios. Maybe it was some elaborate prank on someone that backfired and everyone ran for cover. Was there any compulsion to do this on the part of Tom and perhaps David? I just couldn't think of anything. Then one Sunday afternoon, as I was leaving the spare bedroom, someone started banging on the brass door knocker. I had just put Cliff down for a nap and was seriously considering taking some sleep myself. I didn't want anyone to bother us. I opened the door in frozen shock. After a long silence, I heard, "Aren't you going to invite me in?" "Yes, please," I answered, stunned. Kumin, Evie. She came in and I automatically asked her to be quiet. Seeing the surprised look, I tiptoed into the nursery and showed her Cliff. She was surprised. I led her into the living room. She sat down on the sofa, and I was next to her. We were silent for a long time. I looked at her and she turned away. And finally I had to break the silence. "How did you find me?" "Car insurance," she answered. "When you received a new policy, the state office which monitors these things received a regular notification. I have had a standing request for any changes with the justification that there may be an outstanding claim under the old policy, but I did it a few months ago. Why did you wait so long?" Evie looked away. "I was ashamed," she said quietly. "From what? That when you needed help, I wasn't there." And she paused, then continued. "And because I knew about John's affair and didn't tell you anything about it, even after I realized that you found out yourself." "Evie," I said quietly, "what are you talking about? Tom's affair with Lynn Richardson?" I knew this had been going on for months. I didn't say anything. Then I realized that you must have found out because you became so withdrawn and upset. I finally got up the courage to talk to you and then you disappeared. Sorry, I slowly digested Evie's words. Now everything has become much clearer. I started to understand something. That's why we couldn't move forward financially. I put in money and he took it out. David was undoubtedly covering for him under the guise of weekly poker games. Now I was completely convinced that David's whole episode was set up in order to what? I still didn't understand it. Yes, it made me defensive and allowed him to do whatever he wanted, but he was already doing it anyway. Why? I shook my head. Evie looked at me with shame, regret, and something else that I couldn't identify in her eyes. "Evie," I left the words hanging in the air. "Yes," she answered quietly. "He took Lynn with him on that non-returnable cruise. I heard them making plans a month in advance." "V, for God's sake, why didn't you tell me anything? It would have been painful, but my whole life was ruined. Please tell me you had no idea about this plan of his." The confused look Evie gave me was enough to answer. "Enough?" I told her what happened at David's in the weeks that followed, and she almost fell apart. All she could say over and over again was, "Sorry, sorry." "Why, Evie? Why didn't you tell me? That's the only thing I can't understand about your role in this case." She turned away from me. "I wanted someone else to tell you. I tried to convey information somehow, but I couldn't allow myself to be associated with this. I don't understand, Evie. Why did you hope that I would find out this from someone else?" "Because if I told you, you would hate me. I thought it would ruin everything." I shook my head. "I'm still confused. You always seemed upset that I dated and then married Tom. Maybe it was unfair. I always thought that you wanted him for yourself." "No, my God, no." Evie turned to me and took my hands. Have you ever seen What Didn't You See? Oh, Marie, I didn't want Tom for myself. I just didn't want you with him. Evie looked at me expecting I don't know what. Emotions raced through my head. I found myself at a loss for words, unsure of what to think or say. As I remained silent, Evie leaned in closer, gently taking hold of my hands in hers. Her fingertips traced delicate patterns on my palms, and when I met her gaze, I detected a mixture of hesitation and concealed desire that I never expected to see in another woman's eyes. With a tentative motion, Evie brought her lips to mine, their touch fleeting before pulling back. She looked at me, almost as if anticipating rejection, or worse, a rebuff. It dawned on me that she awaited my response to her revelation, whatever it might be. A slight shiver ran through her, betraying her nerves, mirroring my own. Some hidden part of me, dormant until now, must have responded to her, for she kissed me again, this time more firmly. My mind whirled with disbelief at the realization that Evie desired me, but her hand rested on my chest, gently guiding me back onto the couch. This wasn't like me. I had to stop, put an end to it all. But we made love. The intimacy was passionate and exhilarating, providing a much-needed release after months of abstinence. But in the morning, I got up, fed Cliff, changed him, and sat in the rocking chair Stan had made for me while my son fell asleep on my lap. Again, Evie entered the room, looked at Cliff, then at me, and smiled sadly. "That's it now, right?" she asked. I was sat, but she was right. "Yes, Evie, last night was wonderful. Thank you for everything, for confessing to me about Tom, and most of all, for opening this new door for me. But I searched for words. But I don't love you, and I think you don't love me either." "No," said Evie, sitting down on the sofa where we experienced such passion yesterday. She quoted the old saying, "The only thing sadder than not achieving your dreams is having them come true." Her lips curled into a sad smile. Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe it was a crazy hobby, but no. Suddenly I finally had you, and as fantastic as it was to be your first woman, the longing disappeared. She stood up and knelt down next to me, touching Cliff's forehead with her lips. I touched Evie's face with my fingertips. She turned her head and kissed them. Then we exchanged a long, tender kiss in which there was no passion, only goodbye. She wiped the tears from her face and left, closing the door behind her. I stood up and took a deep breath. It was time to start. I needed to take a few days off. It's time to go back to where I started and end it all once and for all. I thought about Tom. I took another deep breath. Fine. I was angry and wanted to stay that way. It's probably funny when you've changed so much. You don't expect anything else to stay the same. I drove around the town square and nothing had changed. Well, but I have changed a lot. I arrived in town the night before and stayed with Evie. Truth was stranger than fiction, and we spent the night in pure chastity, even though she only had one bed and we both slept in it. The spark between us, which flared so brightly that evening, almost went out. This experience, thank God, left us as friends. Evie kept an eye on what was going on in the company, especially what John and his sweet little Lynn were doing. What she found out didn't surprise me too much. I spent the morning running errands and meeting some people. I gathered all the information, made several phone calls, and visited the courthouse. I wanted to make sure I had all my stones. I put on a confident expression on my face. I was well aware that I was sick of what was coming, but I was determined not to show it. I drove to my old house, parked on the street, and walked back to sit in one of the two white, painted chairs on the porch. There I waited, trying to remain determined. Finally, Tom's car arrived. He parked the car in the driveway and walked to the front door. His head was down, and I had time to study him as he approached. Damn, he looked terrible. His face was drawn, he lost weight, and the wrinkles that crisscrossed his face made him look 10 years older. Fine. For a second, it seemed to me that he was going to climb the stairs and pass me without noticing that I was here. He realized that someone was sitting there and turned his head. It took a moment for reality to sink in. He frowned for a couple of seconds, as if he was trying to remember me. Then his eyes opened, and he turned very pleasantly pale. Marie, he tried. I have to give him credit. He tried to find a balance between long, suffering, injured husband and thank God you're okay. When he started babbling about how much he missed me and how glad he was that I was home, and he thought he could forgive me, but how dare I bother him and what made me sign the divorce. "Oh, for God's sake, Tom, shut up. What, you can't talk to me like that," he muttered. "Of course I can't. Maybe if I had talked to you like that a long, long time ago, you wouldn't have had this affair with Lynn, and then you wouldn't have given me a fake affair." John kept trying. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Any so-called romance with Lynn was only after what you did to me. I was ready to forgive you, and you ran away. Damn it, you're really being stubborn. Let's end this. I talked to Evie, I talked to Lynn, I talked to David, my lawyer, and yes, I have my own contacted yours. I picked up the folder with documents. I have copies of their statements, copies of the credit card bills and bank statements that you hid from me, which detail your little encounters with Miss Richardson in some detail, starting with a hotel date almost 2 months before that night. Now, how about we sit down and continue our conversation? Or would you rather I start screaming right here, without another word?" He opened the door, and I followed him. I walked over to the chair in the very room where he had been so upset almost a year ago. I carefully placed my purse and the thick folder I was holding on the small table next to me and looked at Tom. He sat down on the couch, and I was struck by the irony of us switching places now. Tom had to clear his throat before speaking. "What do you need, Marie?" "I think the first thing I need is some kind of explanation, if there is one, Tom. If you were so happy with me, why didn't you tell me? I knew we were growing apart and tried my best to solve the problem. But if you didn't want this, why didn't you file for divorce? And for God's sake, why did you do to me what you did that night and then treat me like that, Marie? Believe me, when this all started, I had no intention of hurting you." He stopped as I jumped to my feet. I took 2 steps towards him, raising my hand. "You didn't mean to hurt me. I don't have to believe such nonsense." I managed to control myself and return to my place. "Why did you start this affair? For no reason, Marie," he replied. "She flirted with me and I flirted back. I put all the energy I should have put into our marriage into pursuing her. I enjoyed the feeling of being a man in the city again. I pushed you into the far corner of my mind. I made a conscious decision to cheat on, but I didn't want to lose you," he continued. "I thought it would be a one-hot, and then I'd find a way to make it up to you, and you'd never know. And then I felt fascinated. I needed answers. But why such a setup? All these clever tricks to make me feel like the worst wife on earth, and then how you treated me. You knew I was innocent, and yet you seemed to enjoy rubbing my face in the dirt. I thought you understood everything. I was sure that somehow I had given myself away. I knew I had left clues to my behavior. Of course I was guilty. That's why I saw them, although now I understand that you didn't understand that. So I came up with a plan to make you think you cheated. Then I let it get out of control." I nodded almost sadly. "Now, yes, it is." He shook his head incredulously. "I began to believe my own invention. I thought about it. I managed to convince myself that maybe you really cheated on me with David. I think it was a case of me thinking that if I'm cheating, then maybe you are too. This eased my guilt. As long as I could make myself a victim in some twisted way, it wasn't hard to keep going. I changed the subject. Do you know why I left? I thought you took everything you could. I thought that maybe you had run away for a while, and that I had gone too far. But I thought you would come back. I was ready to forgive you and hope that things would somehow return to normal. You didn't come back and didn't come back. Then I received a divorce decree." He snorted. The clerk didn't even tell anyone that an application had been submitted. "It never occurred to me that you would do this. And I didn't even think to ask, by the way. When I realized what you did, I rushed to Lynn. I told you the whole scheme. She didn't know this. She may have had the morals of an alley cat, but she was horrified by my actions. She kicked me out of her house and hasn't spoken to me since. About me, woman avoided me like I'm infected with the plague. It's not that I don't deserve it. I can agree with that," I said bitterly. "But that's not why I left. I'm an old school, stand by your man woman. I left because I was..." John's jaw dropped. "Your setup convinced me that the father is David. Now I know better. Then I should have known better. David is too much of a real man in town. You wanted to have in him with a pastor stout housewife. He would never want me, at least in this state." Tom looked puzzled at my last remark before returning to the first revelation. "Are you saying that we have a child?" I objected. I don't know what you have. As far as I understand, your participation in Cliff's birth was from a donor. No more than I could have achieved with a tube of chilled sperm. John was so excited that my words flew past him. Don't you understand? Marie, change is everything. Now you can go home. Everything will be the same as it was before. I looked at him, contempt oozing from every pore of my body. Are you saying that now that Lynn left you, you want someone like me back? Well, let me tell you something. If you think that I am still the woman you set up, who you almost destroyed in order to continue your dirty affair, then you are mistaken. I was just as nervous as Tom. He flinched and retreated into the sofa, cushions as my voice rose to a ringing crescendo. Now I continued, sit down, shut up, and listened to what I tell you. You insulted me, you abused my love for you. Physical abuse would not have hurt me as much as the torture you put me through. Luckily, I was able to prepare a little bit before coming here this afternoon. What do you mean? John's voice trembled as he stared at me. I smiled sweetly, leaning back in my chair and stretching my legs. Don't you understand yet? Tom, I already told you that before I came to you I stopped to talk to David. And it was a wonderful conversation. Although I admit we didn't talk much, John's eyes bulged out of his head. He looked at me with disbelief, which turned to horror when I continued. You know, Tom, damn it, if you wanted me to have an affair, you should have given me one for real with David. Do you have any idea what he's like when I pleasured him below the belt? He made a sound and told me that if he knew what kind of wife you have, he would have taken me from you long ago. It never occurred to him that a simple old white housewife could be like that. Of course, he liked night with me even more. God, we looked so hot, his shiny black body pinning me to the bed as I screamed for him to never stop. His endurance, let's just say I begged him to stop before it was all over. Yes, speaking of children, this time I think he definitely impregnated me. After all, I am at the most fertile point in my cycle. Oh God, no. John covered his face with his hands. I can't believe you did this. I sat up straight in my chair, placing my clenched fists on my hips. Of course I didn't do it, you damn idiot. Do you really think I'm so damn stupid? I just went through a month-long scare, and you think I'm going to start the cycle again? Also, David, if you haven't heard, met a wonderful girl at his church and is getting engaged. We talked, and he apologized over and over again for his role in your stunt. He said, and I believe him, that he had no idea you would go this far. I got up not feeling very well, and I endured this for many months, unlike your 5 minutes of suffering. I let the anger shake me for another minute. Then I took a deep breath and held it until I stopped. As I exhaled, I remained calm and focused. That's enough, Tom. I've thought of several cunning plans to take revenge on you, to cause you the same pain as me. I know I can make you lose your job. I can file a criminal case against you. Those blood tests you made me take, all sorts of things appear, including illegal substances. I wonder why the memories of that night are so scattered. Is this the case? My friends include a very nice high-ranking police couple in my new hometown. They made me talk to the district attorney. Does the word conspiracy mean anything to you? I assure you that David, Evie, and everyone else will testify in a minute. I took the folder I brought with me, but that won't happen. Not because I have any feelings for you, but if you're out of work or in jail, you won't be able to pay child support. Besides, my voice became thoughtful and a little sad as I thought again about how things turned out with this person. Besides, I'm not going to waste my life on you anymore. I've wasted enough heartache and suffering. I will live in the future, not in the past. I handed him the folder. So here it is, our new financial agreement. I get 50% of what we had at the time of the divorce. I'm even giving you a $10,000 loan. However, you will be reimbursed for your little cruises and all the other amenities you showered on Lynn. In addition, you agree to pay a regular percentage of your salary and child support until Cliff turns 18 or graduates from college. You can discuss this with your lawyer. He has a copy. He will offer to sign it. He doesn't really like the word conspiracy either. I gathered my things and looked at him. Have questions? He shook his head silently. I nodded and headed towards the door. Goodbye, Tom, and all the way home I never looked back. Another year has passed. I still talk to Evie sometimes. I don't ask about Tom, and she doesn't tell me. This is a turning page of my life. I still sometimes wonder how things would have turned out if John had been strong enough to resist the urge to cheat or at least not fall for this wild plan to cover his tracks. But I don't spend much time thinking about these things. I still live with Cliff's wonderful step-grandparents. I still work at the grocery store. Yes, I could buy a house and maybe get a more prestigious job, but I'm happy where I am. I have many friends in this warm city. When Cliff and I leave the house, we spend half the time waving and greeting friends on the street and talking to people we know. The child support Tom pays each month goes into a trust fund for Cliff and his college education. I use some of my income to buy a minivan, and with Stan and Muriel's permission, converted the top floor into additional bedrooms. Why do I need additional bedrooms? Because I still hope. I didn't understand Tom. I didn't understand that although he was physically strong and handsome, he was weak in relationships. Let it be so. I don't hate him. I just feel a little sorry for him because he would never have me again. And I decided that I was a damn good catch. Not long ago, we talked on the phone. He would like to see his son someday. That's good. I won't interfere. He even asked if Cliff could spend the weekend with him when he was older. There's a wistful quality to his voice when he talks about what they could do together. This is amazing. A man should take his son to a ball game fishing. Not that Tom is a fisherman, camping, whatever the boy and his father need to do together. I would like to have more children. I wish I could find someone again to share my life with, someone I could trust. Can take some time. I am dating. I met a paramedic who works at the hospital, and he's damn cute. I think Cliff may have to spend Saturday night with his grandparents again. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. For me, it is now when I look in the mirror. I see a woman who can stand on her own 2 feet and live her own life. So until I find that person I can walk with, I won't be afraid to walk alone.